The rain hammered Chicago's South Side the morning Catherine Martinez turned 38, but she barely noticed it through the kitchen window of the two-bedroom apartment she'd shared with her father for the last 6 years. The water streaked down glass, already fogged from the radiator's relentless hiss, blurring the world outside into shapes that didn't demand attention, didn't require decisions, didn't force her to think about the empty hospital bed 3 blocks away, where Dad had finally stopped breathing 2 days ago. The apartment smelled like burnt coffee and old grief. Catherine had made a pot at 4 in the morning because sleep felt like betrayal, like if she closed her eyes she'd wake up and he'd still be gone, which made no sense because he was already gone, had been slipping away for months as the cancer did its patient, methodical work. But logic didn't apply to loss. She'd learned that when Mom died 12 years ago, you just survived it one impossible hour after another, until eventually the hours stopped feeling quite so heavy. Her phone buzzed for the 16th time that morning. Marcus again. Or Tyler. Her older brothers, circling like sharks who'd smelled blood in the water the moment the doctor pronounced time of death. She let it ring. The funeral was tomorrow. St. Augustine's, the church where Dad had brought them every Sunday until his body stopped cooperating with his faith. Father Donnelly would say nice things about Miguel Martinez, master carpenter, devoted father, pillar of the community. People would nod and mean it because Dad had been all those things and more. He'd built half the custom furniture in this neighborhood, repaired the other half, taught woodworking to kids at the community center for free every Saturday for 20 years. And Marcus and Tyler would stand there in suits they'd bought specifically for this, looking appropriately sad while mentally calculating how fast they could liquidate Dad's assets and divide the proceeds. Catherine's hands tightened around her coffee mug, ceramic warm against palms that felt perpetually cold these days. Her brothers had been calling for weeks, ever since the hospice nurse gently suggested it might be time to get affairs in order, asking about the will, about property, about Dad's workshop, about whether Catherine had realistic plans for supporting herself once the apartment lease ran out. Because of course she didn't. 38 years old, never married, no kids, working part-time at the public library because full-time wasn't available and Dad's medical bills had eaten through savings faster than they could rebuild them. She'd given up her own studio apartment 2 years ago to move in here, to take care of him, to be present for the slow, daily erosion of watching someone you love disappear by degrees. Marcus ran a commercial construction company. Tyler managed a real estate investment firm. Both had families, houses in the suburbs, retirement accounts, and that particular confidence that came from never having to choose between paying rent and buying medication. Both had stopped visiting Dad 6 months ago, when it became clear his dying would be prolonged and uncomfortable and interfere with their schedules. Her phone buzzed again. She picked it up this time, Tyler's name flashing across the screen. What? Her voice came out harder than intended. Jesus, Cat, you could try answering once in a while. Tyler's tone carried that edge of aggrieved patience he perfected in childhood when Mom made him include his little sister in neighborhood games. We need to talk about Dad's estate. We're burying him tomorrow. Can this wait? No, actually it can't. The lawyer's office called. There's a reading of the will scheduled for Friday. Marcus and I have been trying to coordinate with you, but you're not exactly making yourself available. Catherine closed her eyes, pressing fingertips against the headache building behind her temples. Fine. What time Friday? 10 a.m., Brennan and Associates, downtown. Don't be late. He paused, his voice softening into something that might have been genuine concern if she didn't know him better. You okay? You need anything? I'm fine. Cat, listen. He stopped, regrouped. Look, I know you and Dad were close. I know this is hard, but you need to start thinking practically about what comes next. The apartment lease is in his name. His pension stops. His Social Security stops. You're going to need to figure out your situation. The suggestion hung between them, unspoken but clear. Move on. Get a real job. Stop pretending proximity to Dad's workshop made you a carpenter. Stop living like his death was anything other than the inevitable conclusion to a life fully lived. I'll see you Friday. She hung up before he could say anything else, before the careful concern in his voice could crack the shell she'd built around her emotions. The apartment was too quiet after the call ended. She could hear the upstairs neighbor's television, the couple next door arguing in Spanish, traffic sounds muffled by rain. All the noise of other people's lives continuing while hers felt suspended in amber, trapped in this moment between before and after. She walked through the living room Dad had never quite finished renovating, past the couch he'd reupholstered himself, past the bookshelf he'd built when Catherine was 7 and announced she wanted to read every book in the world. The photos on the mantel documented their lives in frozen moments. Mom laughing at some long-forgotten joke. Marcus and Tyler, as teenagers looking vaguely annoyed at having to pose. Catherine at 16, holding her first completed project, a small jewelry box with dovetail joints that still weren't quite perfect. And in the center, the family photo from before Mom got sick, before the boys left for college and never quite came back, before Dad's hands started shaking too much to do the detail work he loved. All 5 of them together, whole, not yet understanding how fragile that wholeness was. Catherine stood in the doorway of Dad's workshop, a converted bedroom that had become his sanctuary after Mom died. The space smelled like sawdust and linseed oil and decades of patient work. Tools hung on pegboards and arrangements he'd refined over 40 years, each implement positioned exactly where muscle memory would reach for it. His workbench dominated the center of the room, 8 feet of solid maple he'd built as a journeyman at 23, before Catherine was born, before any of them knew what his hands would create across a lifetime. The bench was beautiful in its utility, scarred with use but maintained with reverence. The vices were oiled and functional. The surface showed the particular patina of wood worked by someone who understood its nature. Drawers underneath held carefully organized supplies, sandpaper grated by grit, brushes cleaned and stored properly, small tools and foam cutouts that prevented damage. Catherine ran, her hand across the surface, feeling the slight dips where Dad's weight had leaned during countless hours of work. This bench had supported everything he'd built, every chair and table and cabinet, every repair job for neighbors who couldn't afford to buy new, every lesson he'd taught to kids at the community center who needed to know their hands could create something beautiful. And Marcus wanted to sell it. He'd said so on one of his rare visits last month, looking around the workshop with the calculating eye of someone assessing assets rather than remembering history. This equipment's worth something. Classic tools, well-maintained bench. I know a dealer who specializes in estate liquidation. We could get a decent price. Dad had been sleeping in a hospital bed set up in the living room, too weak to argue, but his eyes had found Catherine's and she'd seen the request there. Don't let them. She'd promised. Squeezed his hand and promised. Her phone buzzed again. Marcus this time, the message terse and practical. Lawyer says estate's complicated. Plan for lengthy meeting Friday. Bring questions. Complicated. That was Marcus speak for, there's going to be conflict, and I'm prepared to fight for what I think I deserve. Catherine looked at the workbench, at the tools, at the space that held more of her father than the hospital ever had. Whatever happened Friday, whatever the will said, whatever her brothers wanted, she wouldn't let this be sold and scattered to strangers who'd never understand what these things meant. She'd promised. The funeral happened under skies that couldn't decide between rain and sleet, precipitation that fell in sheets during Father Donnelly's homily, and eased to drizzle when they lowered the casket. Catherine stood between her brothers at the graveside, their bulk shielding her from wind that cut through her coat like it had personal grievances. Marcus wore Armani. Tyler wore Brooks Brothers. Both had wives who dressed appropriately somber, who murmured correct condolences, who managed to convey sympathy while standing at precisely the social distance that indicated obligation rather than genuine grief. Catherine wore the black dress she'd bought for Mom's funeral and shoes that were sensible rather than stylish, because she'd be on her feet at the library tomorrow, and comfort mattered more than appearance. The crowd was larger than she'd expected. Dad's friends from the union, former students from the community center, neighbors who remembered the time he'd repair their furniture for free or taught their kid how to use a lathe or simply been the kind of steady presence that neighborhoods needed. Mrs. Chun from the corner market cried openly, her husband supporting her with the patient competence of 60 years together. He fixed our counter when we first opened. Wouldn't take money. Said we'd pay forward by being good to the neighborhood. Tommy Rodriguez, now 35 with 3 kids of his own, stood with other former students. Mr. Martinez taught me woodworking when I was 15 and failing everything. Gave me something to be proud of. Changed my whole trajectory. The stories accumulated at the reception afterward. People approaching Catherine with memories that filled in pieces of her father's life she hadn't witnessed. The quiet repairs, the patient teaching, the way he'd show up when someone needed help and never make them feel diminished by accepting it. Marcus and Tyler accepted condolences with practiced grace, shaking hands and nodding appropriately. But Catherine could see them checking watches, calculating when they could leave without seeming disrespectful. They had lives to return to. This was interruption, not transformation. She stayed until the last guest left, helping the church ladies clean up, accepting their fierce hugs and promises to check on her. Mrs. O'Malley, who'd known Dad since he was 20, gripped Catherine's hands with surprising strength. Your father was a good man. The best I knew. He worried about you these last months, whether you'd be okay. She paused, her eyes sharp despite their cloudiness. You're stronger than you think, Catherine. You have his hands and his heart. Don't let anyone convince you that's not enough. The words settled into Catherine's chest, warm and solid against the cold that had taken up residence since Dad stopped breathing. Friday morning arrived with brutal clarity, the kind of winter sunshine that made everything look sharp and unforgiving. Catherine took the L downtown, wedged between commuters absorbed in phones or books, or the careful psychological distance that made sharing space with strangers tolerable. Brennan and Associates occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower that probably cost more per square foot than Catherine's entire apartment. The reception area was all sleek surfaces and modern art, designed to intimidate people into respecting the firm's authority. Marcus and Tyler were already there, seated in leather chairs, both scrolling through phones with the distracted intensity of men whose time was valuable and being wasted. You're late. Marcus didn't look up. I'm 5 minutes early. Catherine sat across from them, declining the receptionist's offer of coffee or water. We've been here for 20 minutes. That's how you show respect for other people's schedules. Before Catherine could respond, a woman in her 50s emerged from the inner office. Sandra Brennan, according to the nameplate, senior partner with 3 decades of estate law experience written in the confident set of her shoulders. The Martinez family, thank you for coming. Please follow me. Her office was smaller than Catherine expected, lined with legal texts and family photos showing the kind of carefully curated life that came from choices made consciously rather than desperately. Brennan settled behind her desk, pulling out a file thick with documents. First, let me express my condolences. Your father was a remarkable man. I had the pleasure of working with him over the years on various estate planning matters, and I always found him thoughtful and principled. Tyler shifted impatiently. We appreciate that, but we have tight schedules today. Perhaps we could move to the will? Brennan's smile didn't waver, but something sharp flickered in her eyes. Of course, though I should mention that your father's estate is, as I indicated to Marcus, somewhat complicated. She opened the file, reading glasses perched on her nose. Miguel Antonio Martinez, being of sound mind and body when this will was executed 5 years ago, made very specific bequests. Catherine felt her brothers tense, the air in the room shifting as attention sharpened. To my sons, Marcus and Tyler Martinez, who have built successful lives and careers, I leave the sum of $25,000 each in my blessing. The amount hung in the air. Not nothing, but not the windfall they'd been anticipating. Marcus leaned forward. That's it? $25,000? Your father's estate is valued at approximately $300,000 total. Brennan's voice stayed professional. The distribution is detailed and intentional. And the rest? Tyler's tone had hardened. Where does the rest go? Brennan turned pages, finding the relevant section. To my daughter, Catherine Elena Martinez, who has shown devotion beyond measure and understanding beyond words. I leave my workshop complete with all tools, equipment, and the workbench that has been the foundation of my craft. I'll leave her my house in Riverside, Illinois, the property I purchased 40 years ago and have maintained for this purpose." Catherine's breath stopped. "What house? Your father owned a house?" Tyler was already calculating. Catherine could see it in his eyes. "How do we not know this?" He was private about certain matters. Brennan pulled out additional documents. "The house at 742 Oakmont Street in Riverside has been in his possession since 1984. It's currently valued at approximately $175,000, though it requires substantial renovation." Marcus stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. Kat's lived off Dad for years while Tyler and I built careers and families. Now she gets the majority of the estate because she hung around playing caretaker? I moved in to take care of him when you stopped visiting." Catherine's voice came out louder than intended, sharp with anger that had been building for months. "I gave up my apartment, my savings, my life to be there when he needed someone. Where were you when he couldn't shower himself? When he needed help using the bathroom? When he was scared and in pain and wanted his family? We have responsibilities, so did I. I chose him over everything else. You chose everything else over him." Brennan's voice cut through the rising argument. "Your father's distribution reflects his wishes, which were made clear and legally documented. The estate has been structured to ensure Catherine receives assets that acknowledge her sacrifice and provide foundation for her future." Tyler's jaw was tight, his hands clenched. "We're contesting this. Cat has no ability to maintain property or run Dad's business. This is him being sentimental instead of practical. Your father anticipated challenges to the will." Brennan's tone sharpened. He included specific language requiring unanimous family agreement to sell any bequeathed assets within 5 years of his death. Additionally, he established a trust ensuring Catherine has right of first refusal on any disposal of the workshop equipment. She looked directly at the brothers. "You can contest if you wish." But Miguel was thorough in his planning and explicit in his reasoning. "The will is legally sound." Marcus turned to Catherine, his expression a mixture of frustration and something that might have been genuine concern underneath calculation. "Cat, be realistic. You can't manage a house that needs renovation. You're working part-time at a library. You have no construction experience, no capital for repairs, no plan for generating income. I can learn. This isn't a hobby project. Property ownership is responsibility. Taxes, maintenance, insurance, structural issues. What happens when a roof needs replacing and you don't have $15,000? I figured out. With what skills? What resources?" His voice softened, became almost gentle. "Dad meant well, but this is setting you up for failure. Let Tyler and me help. We'll sell the property, invest your portion conservatively, ensure you have stable income and security." It was a reasonable offer, presented with apparent concern. The kind of thing that made sense to people who measured life in spreadsheets and risk assessments. But Catherine looked at Brennan's steady gaze and remembered Mrs. O'Malley's words about being stronger than she thought. Remembered her father's hands creating beautiful things from raw materials and patience. Remembered the promise she'd made to protect his workshop from being scattered to strangers. "No." The word came out clear and firm. "I'm keeping the house. I'm keeping the workshop. Dad left these to me for a reason." Tyler stood as well, his professional courtesy finally cracking. "Fine. Refuse our help. But when you're drowning in debt and begging for money, remember we offered. Remember we tried to save you from your own stubbornness." They left together, their expensive shoes clicking on marble floors, their postures radiating offended righteousness and barely contained anger. Brennan waited until the door closed before speaking again. "Your father knew they'd react this way. He left you something else." She pulled out a sealed envelope, cream-colored and heavy, with Catherine's name written in Dad's careful handwriting. "He asked me to give you this after the will reading, specifically after your brothers left." Catherine took it with shaking hands, the paper warm from Brennan's desk drawer. She broke the seal and unfolded pages covered in Dad's script, the handwriting showing the tremor that had started 2 years ago, but still maintaining the precision he brought to everything. "Mihija, if you're reading this, I'm gone and your brothers have made their position clear. I'm sorry for putting you in this situation, but I trust you more than I trust them with what matters. The house in Riverside was your grandmother's. She left it to me when she died, made me promise to keep it in the family, to use it for something that honored her memory. I rented it for years, saved the income, maintained it when I could. But I always knew it was meant for you. Your brothers measure value in money. You measure it in meaning. That's why you get the house and the workshop and the responsibility that comes with them. The house needs work. I wish I could have fixed it before leaving it to you, but time ran out faster than I planned. But there's something there worth finding, mi hija. Something Abuela wanted you to have. In the workshop, under the workbench, there's a drawer that doesn't look like it opens. Find it. What's inside will help you understand. You're stronger than you know. You have hands that can build and a heart that understands why building matters. Don't let your brothers convince you to sell what can't be bought back. Can't do me more. Papa Catherine read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the words, but not their meaning. Brennan sat quietly, giving her space to process. Did he tell you what's under the workbench? No. Your father was private about certain things, but he was insistent that you'd know what to do when you found it. Brennan paused. The house keys are ready whenever you want them. I'd recommend visiting before making any decisions about whether to keep or sell. Catherine folded the letter carefully, slipping it into her purse. I'm keeping it. Whatever condition it's in, whatever it needs, I'm keeping it. Your brothers won't make this easy. They never do. Brennan's smile held approval. Your father would be proud of you. The keys to 742 Oakmont Street felt heavy in Catherine's pocket as she took the L back north, then transferred to the Metro for the ride to Riverside. The suburb was older, established, the kind of place where houses had histories and trees predated the streets they shaded. She walked from the station following GPS coordinates, passing well-maintained homes with careful landscaping and the quiet prosperity that came from decades of stable property values. 742 Oakmont sat on a corner lot, a craftsman bungalow with good bones and visible neglect. The porch sagged slightly on the left side. Paint peeled from siding that had once been white but had faded to something closer to gray. Windows were intact but dirty, showing dark interior spaces. The yard was overgrown, not completely wild but obviously unmaintained for months or longer. But the structure itself looked solid. The roofline was straight, foundation showed no obvious cracks, and the architectural details, decorative brackets under the eaves, original leaded glass in the front door, suggested the house had been built with care and quality materials. Catherine stood on the sidewalk, key in hand, trying to see what her father had seen when he bought this place 40 years ago, trying to understand what her grandmother had wanted preserved. An older woman emerged from the house next door, walking with the careful purpose of someone whose joints protested sudden movements, but whose determination overrode discomfort. She was 70-something, with steel-gray hair and eyes that assessed Catherine with sharp interest. You're Miguel's daughter. It wasn't a question. Yes, Catherine Martinez. The woman's expression softened slightly. I'm Dorothy Brennan, no relation to your lawyer. Lived next door for 42 years. Your father was a good tenant, always paid on time, handled repairs himself when the property manager gave him permission. She paused. I'm sorry for your loss. Cancer? Yes. It's a cruel way to go. Dorothy studied the house with the familiarity of decades. Property's been empty since last summer when the tenant moved out. Miguel said he was waiting for the right person to take it over. Her gaze returned to Catherine. I'm guessing that's you. I inherited it. My brothers wanted to sell. What do you want? The question was direct, expecting honest answer rather than polite deflection. Catherine looked at the house again, seeing past the cosmetic decay to the structure underneath, the potential hidden beneath years of deferred maintenance. I want to understand why Dad kept this secret for 40 years. Why Abuela made him promise to preserve it. What he thought I'd find here that mattered more than money. Dorothy nodded slowly. Your grandmother was something special. Tough as nails, generous as saints, protective of what she valued. This house meant everything to her. She pulled a business card from her pocket, writing a number on the back. You need anything, advice about contractors, understanding about the neighborhood, someone to check on the place. You call me. Miguel would have wanted you to have help. She walked back to her house, leaving Catherine alone with the keys and the decision that didn't really feel like a choice anymore. The front door stuck slightly, swollen from moisture or time, but gave way with pressure. Catherine stepped into darkness that smelled like dust and stale air and decades of other people's lives. She found light switches, flipping them experimentally. Some worked, others didn't. The layout was typical craftsman. Living room opening to dining room, kitchen at the back, bedrooms and bathroom down a hall, stairs to a finished attic. The furniture was gone, removed by the last tenant probably, but marks on hardwood showed where heavy pieces had sat for years. The woodwork was beautiful. Original built-in cabinets in the dining room, crown molding that showed skilled installation, window frames with decorative details that indicated the 1920s when houses were built by craftsmen who understood their trade. But water damage stained the ceiling in 2 rooms. The kitchen needed complete updating, appliances ancient and cabinets showing rot where pipes had leaked. The bathroom was clean but dated, tile cracked and fixtures showing their age. Catherine walked through slowly, cataloging problems with the systematic attention Dad had taught her. Roof needed inspection and probable repair. Electrical system required updating to modern code. Plumbing showed its age. Floors needed refinishing. Paint everywhere. The scope was overwhelming. Easily $50,000 of work, maybe more if they found problems during renovation. Money she didn't have. Skills she'd only partially developed through years of watching Dad work and occasional attempts at simpler projects. But the bones were good. The foundation solid. The craftsmanship evident in details that modern construction had abandoned for cost efficiency. This house had been built to last by people who understood quality mattered. In the basement, Catherine found Dad's mark. Repairs done recently. Careful work that stabilized joists and addressed moisture issues with the precision she recognized. He'd been maintaining this property even while sick, preparing it for her even when he couldn't tell her it existed. She sat on the basement steps, surrounded by evidence of her father's secret care, and felt the weight of inheritance shift. This wasn't just property. It was faith that she could handle what he left her. Trust that she'd understand why preservation mattered more than liquidation. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, the text curt. Lawyers sent paperwork. Signed and returned by Monday to start sale process. Don't be difficult about this. Catherine deleted it without responding. She climbed back upstairs, walking through rooms with new attention, seeing past the decay to potential. The living room could be beautiful with refinished floors and the built-ins restored. The kitchen could function with modern appliances and careful renovation that honored original design. The bedrooms just needed cosmetic work, fresh paint, and attention. It would take time. It would take money she'd have to find somehow. It would mean learning skills beyond what Dad had taught her and accepting help from people who'd known her grandmother and her father and understood why this mattered. But standing in the dusty living room with afternoon light filtering through dirty windows, Catherine made her decision with the same certainty she'd felt refusing her brother's offer. She was keeping the house. She was learning what it needed to teach her. She was finding whatever Abuela had wanted preserved and Dad had protected for 40 years. And she was starting with the workshop bench, finding that hidden drawer, discovering what her father thought would help her understand. The workshop had traveled with Catherine from Chicago to Riverside piece by careful piece, Marcus and Tyler watching with barely concealed irritation as she loaded Dad's tools into a rented truck. They'd shown up unannounced at the apartment 3 days after the will reading, solidarity in their opposition forming faster than Catherine had anticipated. This is insane. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, blocking the path Catherine needed to carry a box of hand planes. You're moving into a house that needs $50,000 in repairs with zero plan for how to pay for them. I have a plan. Catherine shifted the box to her hip, waiting for him to move. Working part-time a library and hoping for miracles isn't a plan. Neither is letting you sell everything Dad spent his life building so you can add it to your investment portfolio. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to back down despite the familiar childhood dynamic of big brothers who knew better. Tyler emerged from the workshop carrying a drawer of chisels, his expression showing calculation rather than Marcus's frustration. Cat, let's be rational. We're not trying to cheat you. We want to help. But you're making decisions based on emotion instead of logic. Dad made decisions based on meaning instead of money. I'm following his example. And look where that got him. Tyler's voice was sharp, anger breaking through professional courtesy. Dead at 68 with $300,000 to show for 40 years of work. If he'd invested properly, built equity strategically, he could have left us all substantial inheritances instead of making you responsible for a money pit. The words hung ugly in the dusty air. Catherine set down the box carefully. Her hands shaking with rage, she refused to let control her voice. Dad spent 40 years creating beautiful things and teaching people who had nothing that their hands could matter. He helped neighbors who couldn't afford repairs. He gave time and skill and care to a community that loved him enough to pack a church for his funeral. You measure his life in dollars and call it wasted. I measure it in meaning and call it success. Marcus pushed off the doorframe, his expression softening slightly. Cat, we're not the enemy here. We're trying to protect you from making mistakes that will haunt you for years. You've never managed property, never run a business, never handled the kind of responsibility you're taking on. What happens when something breaks and you can't fix it? When taxes come due and you don't have the money? When you're 45 and still working part-time with no retirement savings? I figured out. Like I figured out how to take care of Dad when you were too busy. Like I'll figure out everything else that comes. They left shortly after, their expensive cars pulling away from the curb with the finality of people who'd done their duty and been rejected. Catherine had watched them go, feeling both relief and a sharp loneliness that came from choosing the hard path alone. The workbench had required professional movers, 3 men who understood how to handle 8 feet of solid maple weighing close to 400 pounds. They positioned it in the Riverside house's basement, the only space with ceiling height and floor strength to accommodate it properly. Catherine had supervised with anxious attention, making sure they didn't damage the surface or jostle the drawers too roughly. Now, a week after the move, she stood in the basement surrounded by carefully arranged tools and the bench that had been the center of Dad's working life. The space was cold, heating system needed attention, another item on the endless list but dry and solid, with good light from windows set high in the foundation walls. She'd spent days organizing the workshop exactly as Dad had kept it, muscle memory guiding placement until the arrangement felt right. Each tool in its designated spot, each drawer containing its specific supplies, the bench positioned to catch morning light the way he'd preferred. The letter had mentioned a drawer that didn't look like it opened. Catherine had examined every visible drawer, finding standard construction, dovetailed corners, smooth slides, functional pulls. Nothing unusual or hidden. She knelt on the concrete floor, running her hands along the underside of the bench, feeling for irregularities in the smooth maple. The wood was cool against her palms, worn smooth in places where Dad's hands had touched repeatedly over decades. There, a seam where there shouldn't be one, hidden by the natural grain pattern. She traced it with her fingers, finding edges that suggested a panel rather than solid wood. No visible hardware, no obvious way to release whatever mechanism held it closed. Catherine sat back on her heels, studying the bench from this angle. Dad had been clever with hidden joinery, teaching her how craftsmen disguised functional elements within decorative design. If he'd built a secret drawer, it would open through some elegant solution that looked accidental until you understood the logic. She examined the leg closest to the seam, finding decorative elements carved into the maple. Traditional designs common in furniture from the 1970s when Dad had built this piece. Her fingers found a rosette that seemed slightly proud of the surface, turning when she applied pressure. The click was quiet but definite. The panel dropped an inch, hinges she hadn't seen revealing themselves. Catherine pulled it open carefully, her heart hammering with anticipation and fear of disappointment. Inside was a metal box, flat and wide, built to fit the shallow space. She pulled it out, the weight substantial, and carried it upstairs to the kitchen where better light and a table made examination easier. The box wasn't locked, just latched. Catherine opened it with shaking hands. Papers filled the interior, organized in folders and envelopes with Dad's characteristic precision. She pulled out the first folder, finding property records for the Riverside house dating back to 1984 when he'd purchased it. Purchase price, $48,000, a fortune for a carpenter in his mid-20s. Except the records showed he'd paid cash. No mortgage, no loan, just a single payment that cleared the title completely. Where had he gotten that kind of money? Catherine kept searching, finding more documents. Rental agreements spanning 4 decades, each tenant carefully vetted, each lease negotiated fairly. Tax records showing steady income from the property. Maintenance receipts documenting every repair Dad had done personally, keeping the house functional despite his other responsibilities. And underneath everything, a second envelope sealed with wax, her name written across the front in handwriting she didn't recognize. Older, more formal, the letters shaped with the precision of someone educated when penmanship mattered. She broke the seal carefully, unfolding pages. That crackled slightly with age. Para mi nieta Catherine. If you're reading this, then Miguel has passed, and you found what we've kept safe for you. I'm sorry I couldn't know you, couldn't watch you grow, couldn't teach you the things a grandmother should share. Your mother, my daughter Maria, and I had complicated relationships, and by the time I understood the cost of that stubbornness, she was gone and you were too young for me to reach. But Miguel promised to keep this house safe, to preserve what we built, and to make sure you understood when the time came. Your grandfather, Antonio Martinez, was a brilliant carpenter who came to Chicago from Mexico in 1952 with nothing but his tools and his faith that skill would be enough. He built furniture for wealthy families, earned their trust through quality and integrity, and saved every dollar he could. In 1968, a client offered him an unusual commission. They needed someone who could build a specialized storage system, something secure and hidden for items they wanted protected. Your grandfather built it, a false floor panel and a workbench they specified, clever joinery that looked decorative but served function. The client paid exceptionally well, $200,000, an impossible sum for carpentry work. Your grandfather knew the job wasn't entirely legal, but the client assured him nothing stolen or harmful would be hidden there, just family valuables they wanted secured during uncertain times. He built it, took the money, bought this house for cash, so I'd have security after he died, which he did in 1975 when you were barely born. I kept the house, rented it carefully, and saved the income for Miguel. But in 1984, Miguel received a letter from the client's estate. The client had died without heirs, and the storage system had never been accessed. The estate lawyers were cleaning up loose ends, closing accounts, liquidating assets. They included a key and a confession. The items hidden in the bench weren't just valuables. They were gold coins purchased illegally in the 1960s when owning gold was restricted, hidden away until laws changed, then forgotten when the client's memory failed in old age. The coins were never claimed. The estate couldn't find them. Your grandfather had built the hiding place too well. Miguel inherited the workbench itself when the client's mansion was sold, taking it as payment for the original commission that had never been fully explained. He searched for the hiding place for years, Catherine. Examined every inch of that bench, trying to understand what Antonio had built. But the secret died with your grandfather, and Miguel eventually gave up, assumed the story was exaggeration or confusion. Until 3 months ago when he was dying and called me in the night, terrified and excited. He'd found it. After 40 years, he'd finally understood Antonio's design. The coins are still there, Catherine. We verified the existence, but didn't remove them. Miguel wanted you to find them yourself, to understand the full weight of what you're inheriting. This money comes with responsibility. Antonio earned it honestly, even if the client's purposes weren't entirely pure. The gold is legally yours. Enough time has passed. The estate was settled. The lawyers found nothing. But what you do with it matters. You can sell everything, take the money, build the safe, comfortable life your brothers think you should want. Or you can honor what Antonio and Miguel built, the craft, the community, the understanding that some things matter more than money. The choice is yours, mi nieta. But know that I'm proud of you, that Antonio would be proud of you, and that Miguel trusted you completely with this inheritance. Con to do mi amor. Abuela Rosa Catherine read the letter 4 times, her mind struggling to process the implications. Gold coins hidden in the workbench, forgotten for decades, worth potentially millions depending on rarity and current market values. Her hand shook as she returned to the basement, approaching the workbench with new understanding. The secret drawer she'd found had been obvious, a first layer meant to be discovered. But Antonio's real hiding place would be more sophisticated, built with the kind of clever joinery that looked like structural necessity rather than deliberate concealment. She examined the bench systematically, using techniques Dad had taught her for understanding furniture construction. The legs connected to the top through mortise and tenon joints, standard practice. The drawers ran on wooden slides, also traditional. The vices attached with heavy bolts, functional and visible. But the center section of the bench, the thick maple slab that provided work surface, seemed slightly too deep. She measured carefully, comparing exterior dimensions to interior drawer depths. 3 inches of space unaccounted for, hidden in the thickness of the wood itself. Catherine ran her fingers along the underside again, searching for release mechanisms. Nothing obvious. She checked the sides, the back, the decorative elements carved into the apron. There, on the right front leg, a section of carved detail that looked like wood grain but felt slightly different under her fingers. She pressed it and felt movement. Not a click this time, but a slide, a panel shifting inside the bench's structure. The sound of wood moving against wood was quiet but distinct. Catherine held her breath, pressing harder, and felt something give way. A section of the bench top, perhaps 12 inches square, lifted slightly. She pulled it up carefully, revealing a cavity carved into the solid maple. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had kept moisture away for over 50 years, were stacks of gold coins and protective holders. Catherine lifted one out with trembling hands. American gold eagles, the holders labeled with dates and mint marks. She'd seen similar coins in museums, in collector guides, in news articles about precious metal investments. Each one was an ounce of pure gold, worth roughly $2,000 at current market rates. She started counting, her heart hammering so hard she felt dizzy. 10 coins, 20, 50, 100. The stacks kept coming, organized precisely, protected carefully, hidden with the kind of craftsmanship that had made Antonio Martinez legendary in his time. When she finished counting, Catherine sat on the cold basement floor with her back against the workbench and stared at the number she'd written in her notebook. 4,250 gold coins. At current market rates of approximately $2,000 per coin, the total value was roughly $8.5 million. She'd inherited $8.5 million hidden in a workbench her brothers wanted to sell for maybe $5,000 to an estate liquidator. The irony was so sharp it made her laugh, a slightly hysterical sound that echoed in the empty basement. Marcus and Tyler had measured Dad's life in the $300,000 estate and called it insufficient. They'd looked at the workshop and seen used tools worth pennies on the dollar. They'd completely missed $8.5 million sitting in plain sight. Catherine's laughter faded to silence as the reality settled over her. This money changed everything. It solved every financial problem she faced, eliminated every obstacle her brothers had thrown at her, proved every doubt they'd expressed wrong. She could renovate the house completely, could establish herself as a furniture maker, could create the kind of workshop and teaching space Dad had always wanted, could tell Marcus and Tyler exactly where they could shove their concern and condescension. But Abuela Rosa's words echoed in her mind. What you do with it matters. Catherine sat in the basement for hours as afternoon faded to evening, thinking about choices and responsibility and the difference between what money could buy and what it should be used for. The coins represented security, yes, freedom from financial anxiety and the power to make decisions without desperation. But they also represented trust. Antonio had built something clever enough to protect valuables for 50 years. Rosa had preserved it even when money might have solved her own problems. Miguel had verified its existence, but left it for Catherine to find, to claim, to understand fully. This wasn't just inheritance. It was a test of what she valued. Her phone buzzed, shattering the silence. A text from Tyler. Need your signature on sale documents by end of week. Stop being stubborn. This is for your own good. Catherine looked at the coins spread across the floor, at the wealth her brothers didn't know existed, at the proof that Dad's trust in her had been rewarded. She typed back, "Not selling, not signing, not discussing this again." His response came immediately, "You'll regret this." She deleted the message and blocked his number, then blocked Marcus's. Their concern was rooted in condescension, their help conditional on her accepting their judgment of her choices. She didn't need their approval anymore. What she needed was a plan. Dorothy appeared on the porch the next morning with a thermos of coffee and the direct gaze of someone who decided to interfere regardless of invitation. "You look like hell. When's the last time you slept?" Catherine had spent the night researching gold coins, precious metal dealers, tax implications of found property, and legal requirements for declaring windfall assets. The coins were back in their hiding place, the bench locked and secured, but the knowledge of them burned in her mind like fever. "I found something in the house. Something complicated." Dorothy poured coffee into 2 mugs she'd brought, handing one to Catherine. "Your grandmother's secret? You knew. Rosa and I were friends for 30 years. She never told me details, but she mentioned Antonio had left something valuable, something Miguel was protecting for the right time." Dorothy sipped her coffee. "I'm guessing you found it." Catherine made a decision in that moment, choosing trust over isolation. She told Dorothy everything. The letter, the workbench, the coins, the staggering value, and the weight of responsibility that came with it. Dorothy listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from surprise to understanding to something like satisfaction. Antonio Martinez was a genius with wood. Everyone who knew him said so. And Rosa was the toughest woman I ever met, the kind who'd protect something important for 50 years without wavering. She set down her coffee. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. The money solves everything. House renovation, financial security, ability to tell my brothers where to stick their opinions. But it feels like selling out somehow, like taking the easy path instead of earning what matters." "Earning and inheriting aren't the same thing, Catherine. Your grandfather earned this money through skilled work. Your grandmother preserved it through careful stewardship. Your father protected it through trust in you. Now it's yours, earned through being the person they believed you'd become." "What would you do?" Dorothy smiled. "I'd fix the damn house, establish the workshop your father always wanted, and use the money to build something that honors all of them. But I'm a practical woman who believes inheritance should be used, not hoarded out of guilt." Catherine felt something loosen in her chest. The house needs $50,000 in renovations minimum. So spend it. You've got $8 million more where that came from. Dorothy's directness was bracing. But do it smart. Don't flash wealth around. Don't tell people about the coins. And don't trust contractors who smell desperation or money. "I need recommendations. I'll make calls. My nephew runs a good renovation company, honest pricing and quality work. He knew your father slightly, respected him." She paused. "But Catherine, you need to make legal arrangements. Document the discovery, pay appropriate taxes, protect yourself from future claims." "I researched last night. Found property over a certain age with no living claimants belongs to the finder. The estate that originally owned the bench was settled decades ago. Lawyers certified they'd liquidated all assets. The coins are legally mine. Get that in writing from a lawyer who specializes in this kind of thing. Don't assume complexity resolves itself through ignorance." They spent the morning making lists, practical steps that transformed overwhelming possibility into manageable tasks. Dorothy's nephew could start renovation in 2 weeks if Catherine committed. A lawyer Dorothy trusted could handle the legal documentation. A precious metals dealer in Chicago could assess the coins and provide market value estimates without requiring Catherine to sell immediately. One more thing. Dorothy's voice was serious. Your brothers will fight harder once they realize you're succeeding. Success they can dismiss as luck. Sustained success they'll resent and try to undermine. Prepare for that. Catherine thought about Marcus and Tyler's texts, their confidence that she'd fail and come crawling back admitting they were right. They don't know about the coins. Good. Keep it that way. What they don't know can't motivate their interference. The precious metals dealer was a woman in her 60s named Sarah Chun, who operated from a small office in Chicago's Loop with security systems that suggested she handled serious valuations regularly. Catherine had brought 5 coins as samples, carefully transported in her backpack with anxiety that made her jump at every bump on the train. Chun examined each coin under magnification, checking authentication markers with the precision of someone who'd spent decades distinguishing real from counterfeit. American Gold Eagles, various dates from 1986 through 1991. Mint condition, properly stored, completely legitimate. She looked up at Catherine. How many do you have? Over 4,000. Chin's expression didn't change, but something sharp flickered in her eyes. That's approximately $8.5 million at current market rates. Where did you acquire them? Catherine had prepared for this question. Inherited through my family. They were purchased legally in the 1980s after gold ownership restrictions were lifted, then stored and forgotten. You have documentation of ownership? I have documentation of the inheritance, letters from family members explaining the history, and proof the original purchaser's estate was settled without these coins being found. They were hidden too well. She nodded slowly. I'll need to verify this with my legal team, but if your documentation is solid, the coins are yours. The question is what you want to do with them. One of my options, sell immediately for cash, roughly $8 million after dealer fees and taxes. Hold them as investment. Gold tends to maintain value during economic uncertainty. Sell gradually to minimize tax impact and market disruption. Or use them as collateral for loans if you need capital but want to maintain the underlying asset. Catherine thought about the house, about building the workshop, about establishing herself without the vulnerability of asking brothers or banks for help. If I wanted to sell enough to fund immediate renovations, how would that work? Bring me the coins you want to liquidate. I'll verify authenticity. We'll agree on price based on current market rates, and I'll transfer funds to your account within 48 hours. The transaction is taxable as capital gains, so plan for roughly 20% to the IRS. And the rest I could keep here, stored securely? I can arrange vault storage if you don't trust home security. But honestly, if they've been safe for 50 years in a hidden compartment, they're probably fine where they are until you decide on permanent arrangements. Catherine left Chin's office with recommendations for tax lawyers and financial advisors who specialized in windfall asset management. The coins felt simultaneously more real and less believable. Verified value, legitimate options, concrete proof this wasn't fever dream or desperate fantasy. She could do this. She could manage the inheritance responsibly, renovate the house skillfully, build the life Dad had trusted her to create. She just had to survive her brothers finding out. The confrontation came 2 weeks later. Catherine had sold 50 coins through Chun, receiving $96,000 after fees, enough to start serious renovation and establish financial foundation. She'd hired Dorothy's nephew, James Brennan. Apparently the neighborhood was full of Brennans, and his crew had started work on the house's most urgent needs. Marcus and Tyler showed up on a Saturday morning, their expensive cars parked ostentatiously on the street, their expressions showing that particular mix of concern and condescension they'd perfected over decades. We need to talk. Marcus didn't wait for invitation, walking past Catherine into the house, where contractors were replacing the kitchen's rotted subflooring. Tyler followed, his gaze cataloging the obvious work happening. Where did you get money for renovations? I'm managing. Catherine kept her voice level. Managing how? You can't afford this on library wages. What did you do? Take out loans against the property. Because that's incredibly stupid, Cat. You're mortgaging your future on sentiment. James appeared from the kitchen, tool belt slung low on his hips, expression friendly but cautious. Everything okay, Ms. Martinez? Fine. These are my brothers. They're just leaving. We're not leaving until you explain how you're paying for this. Marcus's voice rose slightly. You refused our help, blocked our numbers, and disappeared into some fantasy where you're a competent property manager. Now we find out you're in debt for renovations. This is exactly the irresponsibility we warned against. I'm not in debt. I sold some assets from Dad's estate for initial capital. What assets? The tools? Tyler looked genuinely confused. Those weren't worth enough for this kind of work. Catherine made a decision, choosing partial truth over complete disclosure. Dad had items in the workshop I didn't know about. Things Abuela Rosa left him. I sold a few pieces to jumpstart the renovation. What kind of pieces? Marcus's suspicion was immediate. Family valuables. Nothing you'd be interested in since you measured Dad's life in spreadsheets and found it wanting. Tyler's jaw tightened. You're required to disclose estate assets. If Dad had valuables you didn't report, that's fraud. I reported everything I knew about at the time. The items were hidden, discovered after probate closed. The lawyer confirmed their mind legally. It was technically true. Brennan had verified Catherine's claim to anything found in the inherited property after estate settlement. But the partial truth felt corrosive, keeping secrets from brothers she'd once trusted even if that trust had long since failed. Marcus pulled out his phone. I'm calling our lawyer. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Catherine stood straighter, channeling every ounce of certainty Dad had shown when his principles were challenged. The house is mine. The workshop is mine. Anything I found is mine legally and morally. You can contest all you want, but you'll lose and you'll waste money doing it. This is about more than money. No. Marcus, for you it's only about money. You measured Dad's success in dollars and decided he failed. You looked at his choice to teach and build and serve community and called it wasted potential. You're so busy calculating value that you've forgotten how to recognize meaning. She opened the front door, the gesture unmistakable. Get out. Don't come back unless you're ready to apologize for treating Dad's life like a bad investment. They left, but Tyler's parting words carried threat beneath professional courtesy. We'll be watching, Cat. And when this falls apart, which it will, don't expect us to bail you out. James waited until their cars disappeared before speaking. Family's complicated. That's diplomatic. I knew your dad slightly. He did work for my parents years ago, taught me basic carpentry when I was 12. James's expression was thoughtful. He talked about you sometimes, said you had his hands and his heart, said you'd understand when the time came what really mattered. Did he say anything about what I'd find? No, but he seemed peaceful about it, like he'd solved something that had worried him for years. James returned to the kitchen, calling back, Whatever you found, Ms. Martinez, it was meant for you. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. Catherine stood in the living room of her grandmother's house, surrounded by evidence of renovation beginning, and felt the weight of inheritance settle more firmly on her shoulders. The money was real. The responsibility was real. And the choice to use, both wisely, was entirely hers. Outside, Dorothy waved from her porch, clipboard in hand, already organizing the next phase of work with the efficiency of someone who'd managed projects for decades. Catherine waved back, feeling something like hope kindle in her chest. She could do this. She would do this. And her brothers could go to hell. The renovation moved faster than Catherine had anticipated, James and his crew working with the efficiency of professionals who understood how to balance quality with timeline. Within 6 weeks, the house had transformed from neglected relic to something approaching the craftsman beauty it had been built to embody. The kitchen gleamed with new appliances that honored the original design while providing modern functionality. Countertops were butcher block maple, a nod to Dad's workshop aesthetic. Cabinets had been restored rather than replaced, their original hardware polished and reinstalled. The floor was new oak, installed with the grain patterns aligned in ways only careful craftsmen bothered with anymore. The living room's built-ins had been refinished. They were glowing with the warmth that came from proper care and quality materials. The floors throughout the house had been sanded and sealed, their original beauty revealed after decades of covering. Windows had been repaired and weather-sealed, the leaded glass and the front door restored to its 1920s glory. The bathroom retained its vintage charm but gained functional plumbing and new tile installed in patterns that matched period photographs Dorothy had saved from her own renovations. The bedrooms needed only cosmetic work, fresh paint in colors Catherine chose from historical palettes, refinished closet doors, ceiling fixtures that combined Edison bulbs with modern wiring. The house was becoming something Dad would have been proud of, something Abuela Rosa would recognize, something that honored Antonio's craftsmanship while serving Catherine's future needs. And the cost, while substantial, barely dented the resources hidden in the workbench downstairs. Catherine had sold another 100 coins through Sarah Chun, receiving just under $200,000 after fees and taxes. The money sat in a newly established account, managed by the financial advisor Dorothy had recommended, a woman named Patricia Flores who specialized in helping clients preserve windfall assets rather than spend them recklessly. You're being smart about this. Patricia had reviewed Catherine's plans with approval during their first meeting. Most people who come into sudden money panic and either hoard it uselessly or burn through it on things that don't build lasting value. You're investing in property, establishing business foundation, and maintaining reserves. That's sustainable wealth management. I don't want to end up like those lottery winners who go bankrupt in 5 years. You won't. You understand that money is a tool, not an identity. That's the difference between people who keep wealth and people who lose it. Patricia had created spreadsheets showing how Catherine's resources could sustain her for decades if managed carefully. The house renovation increases property value significantly. The workshop you're planning will generate income through custom furniture and teaching. You're building assets, not just spending money. The workshop was Catherine's next major project. The basement space where Dad's bench lived was functional but cramped, the ceiling too low for comfortable work, the light insufficient for detailed craftsmanship. She'd been designing a proper studio in the house's oversized garage, a space that could accommodate multiple workstations, tool storage, and eventually students learning the skills Dad had spent his life sharing. James had provided estimates, $60,000 for the conversion, including proper ventilation, electrical upgrades, climate control, and the kind of workspace Dad had deserved but never had resources to build. Catherine approved the work without hesitation. Marcus's lawyer called 3 weeks into the renovation. Catherine let it go to voicemail, listening later with detached amusement to the formal language threatening legal action over undisclosed estate assets. She called Brennan, who listened to the message with the weary patience of someone who'd handled family disputes for 30 years. They have no standing. The estate was settled, probate closed, and anything found after that point belongs to you as inheritor of the property. Your brothers are fishing because they suspect you've found something valuable, but suspicion isn't evidence. What if they demand to know what I sold? Refuse. It's none of their business. The estate division was finalized according to your father's wishes. What you do with your inheritance afterward is your concern alone. Marcus's lawyer sent 3 more letters, each escalating in threatening language. Catherine ignored them all on Brennan's advice, watching her brother's frustration build from a distance that felt simultaneously satisfying and sad. They'd never understood what mattered. Still didn't. Probably never would. The library where Catherine had worked part-time for 6 years held a staff meeting in early spring, the director announcing budget cuts that would reduce everyone's hours by 20%. Catherine listened with the detached calm of someone whose survival no longer depended on a paycheck that barely covered rent. She gave notice the following week, her resignation letter brief and professional. The director, a kind woman named Ellen who'd advocated for Catherine's raises and fought for her benefits, looked genuinely sad. You're one of our best employees. I hate losing you to budget politics. I inherited property from my father. I'm renovating it into a workshop and teaching space. Time to focus on that full-time. Ellen's expression shifted to surprise and pleasure. Your father was Miguel Martinez, the woodworker? You knew him. He taught my son basic carpentry 10 years ago at the community center. Changed his life. Marcus is a finished carpenter now, supporting his family doing work he loves. She paused. Your father was a remarkable man. I'm glad you're continuing his legacy. The validation from unexpected sources kept happening. Tommy Rodriguez, the former student who'd spoken at Dad's funeral, stopped by the Riverside house after seeing Catherine's truck parked outside. He'd brought his 3 kids, explaining to them about the man who'd taught their father that hands could build futures. Mr. Martinez gave me purpose when I had none, showed me craftsmanship mattered, that making things well was its own reward. Tommy looked at the renovation work with clear appreciation. This is beautiful. He'd be so proud. Other former students appeared over the following weeks, drawn by words spreading through the old neighborhood network. Each brought stories about Dad's patience, his teaching methods, his absolute belief that anyone could learn if they cared enough to try. Catherine collected the stories like treasures, documenting them in a journal she'd started keeping. The narrative of Dad's life told through the people he'd influenced carried more weight than any dollar value Marcus and Tyler could calculate. She was building something that honored him. Finally, the workshop conversion finished in late May. The garage transformed into a professional-grade studio that made Catherine's breath catch the first time she walked through completed space. 12-foot ceilings gave room for lumber storage and proper ventilation. Industrial lighting eliminated shadows. The electrical system could handle multiple power tools simultaneously. Climate control would protect wood from moisture fluctuations. And Dad's workbench, carefully moved from the basement, occupied the place of honor in the center of all. James had built additional workstations along the walls, smaller benches suitable for students working on individual projects. Tool storage lined one wall with the same organizational precision Dad had maintained. A small office area in the corner could handle administrative work and consultations with clients. This is the kind of space professional furniture makers dream about. James ran his hand along the bench's surface with visible appreciation. Your dad would have loved working here. He's here anyway. Catherine touched the hidden panel that concealed Antonio's secret compartment. Every time I use this bench, I'm continuing what he built. Dorothy organized a small open house for the workshop's completion, inviting neighbors and former students and community members who'd known Dad. 40 people showed up, filling the space with warmth and stories, and the particular joy that came from witnessing something good being built. Mrs. Chun brought homemade dumplings. Tommy Rodriguez brought his family. Former students brought photographs of projects they'd completed under Dad's guidance. The community center director, a young woman named Amira Hassan, brought a proposal. We'd love to partner with you on youth woodworking programs. Miguel's Saturday classes were legendary, but they stopped when he got sick. The kids in this neighborhood need those opportunities again. Constructive skill development, mentorship from someone who cares, understanding that their hands can create value. Catherine felt something settle into place. A puzzle piece she hadn't known was missing. What would partnership look like? You provide space and teaching. We provide insurance, administrative support, student recruitment, and modest compensation for your time. Nothing that would make you rich, but enough to value your expertise professionally. I don't need money. The words came out before Catherine thought about them. Truth spoken to someone who'd understand. But I need purpose. I need to continue what Dad built. If we can help kids the way he did, I'm in. Amira's smile was brilliant. Then let's make it happen. They spent an hour outlining possibilities while the open house continued around them. Saturday morning classes for teenagers interested in trades. After-school programs teaching basic woodworking skills. Summer intensives for kids who wanted deeper engagement. Partnership with local high schools offering vocational credit. Everything Dad had done, expanded and formalized, supported by structure that would let it survive beyond one person's dedication. Catherine signed partnership agreements 2 weeks later, the contracts establishing the Miguel Martinez Community Workshop as a formal nonprofit entity. She'd be executive director, drawing a modest salary that was more about legitimacy than necessity. The community center would handle insurance and liability, student recruitment, background checks for volunteers. The first Saturday class was scheduled for mid-June, registration already full with a waiting list of 15 kids whose parents remembered Dad or had heard stories about what he'd built. Marcus called the night before the first class, his number showing up despite Catherine having blocked it months ago. She let it ring twice before answering, curiosity overriding irritation. "What do you want? Mom would be ashamed of how you're handling this." His voice was tight, with barely controlled anger. "Cutting us out, hiding assets, refusing family support. You're being selfish and short-sighted. Mom would be proud. I'm continuing Dad's work instead of liquidating it for profit. You're playing at carpentry with money that should have been invested properly. What happens when the workshop fad fades and you've burned through your capital on a fantasy?" Catherine walked through the completed studio, her hand trailing along workbenches that would hold students tomorrow, her gaze taking in the tools that would teach kids their hands mattered. "I have more capital than you know, Marcus. More than you believe if I told you. And I'm using it exactly as it was meant to be used, building something that matters more than your investment portfolios." "What capital? What are you talking about?" "Goodbye, Marcus. Don't call again." She blocked his number again, permanently this time, and felt no guilt about the finality. The first Saturday class brought 12 teenagers, ages 14 to 17, their expressions showing the particular wariness of kids who'd learned that adult promises rarely delivered. Catherine recognized the look. She'd seen it in mirrors throughout childhood, that defensive uncertainty about whether investing hope was worth the inevitable disappointment. She started by showing them Dad's workbench, running her hands along the surface that had supported 40 years of creation. "My father built this when he was 23. It's been the foundation for everything he created since then. Furniture for families, repairs for neighbors who couldn't afford new, teaching for students who needed to know their hands could matter." She looked at each teenager directly. "This bench is now the foundation for what you're going to learn. Not just woodworking skills, but understanding that craftsmanship is its own reward. That making things well matters. That your hands can build futures." She divided them into pairs, assigning simple projects that would teach fundamental skills. Cutting boards that required understanding grain direction, small boxes that introduced joinery concepts, picture frames that demanded precision and patience. Tommy Rodriguez had volunteered as assistant instructor, his professional experience and easy manner helping kids relax into the work. He moved between workstations offering guidance that balanced encouragement with honest assessment, the teaching style Dad had perfected over decades. By the end of the 3-hour session, every student had made measurable progress. The cutting boards were rough but functional. The boxes showed effort even when joints didn't align perfectly. The picture frames revealed which kids had natural aptitude and which would need more patient instruction. But more importantly, every kid left with sawdust on their clothes and satisfaction on their faces. That particular pride that came from making something with their own hands, from understanding that raw materials and effort could combine into creation. Same time next week. Amira had observed the entire session, taking notes for program documentation. Same time every week. Catherine cleaned sawdust from workstations, the familiar rhythm of workshop maintenance grounding her. And we'll need to expand capacity. That waiting list isn't going away. Word spread faster than Catherine anticipated. The local newspaper ran a feature about the workshop in July. Photographs showing students bent over projects, Catherine demonstrating technique, the beautiful space that honored Miguel Martinez's legacy while serving the next generation. The article mentioned Catherine's age, her inheritance of her father's tools and teaching mission, and the partnership with the community center. It didn't mention the coins or the wealth that had made everything possible, which was exactly as Catherine preferred. But Marcus saw the article. So did Tyler. They showed up together the following Saturday, parking their expensive cars ostentatiously while Catherine was in the middle of teaching, walking into the workshop with the confidence of people who believed they had every right to intrude. The students noticed immediately the energy shifting as teenagers recognized adult conflict approaching. Catherine set down her chisel carefully, forcing her voice to stay calm and level. "Marcus, Tyler, I'm in the middle of class. Whatever you want can wait." "No, it can't." Tyler's gaze swept the workshop, clearly calculating costs. This facility represents substantial investment. The article says you're running this as nonprofit. Where did the capital come from? That's none of your business. It is our business when you're using undisclosed estate assets to fund vanity projects. Marcus pulled out his phone, showing the newspaper article. You've established a nonprofit, renovated property, created a professional workshop. This represents hundreds of thousands in investment. Money you claim not to have when we offered help. The students are watching now, their attention divided between the confrontation and their work, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. Catherine made a decision, choosing honesty over deflection because these kids deserve to see that standing up to bullies mattered regardless of age. I found valuables hidden in Dad's workshop. Items Abuela Rosa left him. Items that were hidden so well they weren't discovered during probate. I sold some, invested the proceeds in renovating our grandmother's house and building this workshop. Everything I've done is legal, documented, and exactly what Dad wanted. What kind of valuables? Tyler's suspicion was immediate and sharp. The kind that are mine legally and none of your concern morally. Catherine turned to the students, her voice carrying the authority Dad had used when teaching mattered more than everything else. Keep working on your projects. This'll just take a minute. She walked outside, forcing her brothers to follow or make a scene in front of teenagers. They followed, their expensive shoes crunching on the gravel driveway, their postures radiating barely contained fury. Once outside, Marcus's professional courtesy evaporated. You've been hiding assets worth hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, while claiming poverty and refusing our help. That's fraud, Catherine. That's illegal concealment of estate property. No, it's inheritance I didn't know about until after probate closed, discovered in property that was legally mine, sold through legitimate dealers with proper documentation and tax payments. The lawyer confirmed everything I've done is completely legal. Which lawyer? Tyler demanded. Sandra Brennan, who handled Dad's estate. The same lawyer who told you that contesting the will would fail and waste your money. Catherine held their gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated by brothers who'd spent their lives making her feel small. I'm done apologizing for inheriting what Dad wanted me to have. Done explaining choices that are mine to make. Done pretending your concern is anything other than resentment that I got something you think you deserved. This isn't about resentment. Yes, it is. It's about you measuring Dad's life in dollars and being angry that someone who didn't prioritize money got the most valuable inheritance. It's about you thinking caretaking was easy work anyone could do, so it doesn't deserve reward. It's about you believing I'd fail and being furious that I'm succeeding. Marcus's jaw was tight, his hands clenched. You think you're honoring Dad? You're wasting resources on sentimentality instead of building real security. What happens in 20 years when you're 58 with no retirement savings and no marketable skills beyond hobbyist carpentry? In 20 years, I'll have taught thousands of kids that their hands matter. I'll have built furniture that lasts generations. I'll have continued Dad's legacy in ways that mean something beyond your investment portfolios. Catherine's voice was steel underneath the calm. And I'll have $8 million still invested carefully, generating returns that ensure I'll never need your help or approval. The number hung in the air like a grenade. Tyler's face went white. $8 million, roughly, after taxes and renovation costs. The valuables Abuela Rosa left were worth more than any of us imagined. Catherine watched the calculation happen in their eyes, saw them mentally revisiting every condescending comment, every dismissive prediction of her failure. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you so you understand that your concern was never necessary and your judgment was never welcome. I don't need you. I never did. I just needed you to stop pretending you cared while actually just trying to control how I lived. Marcus recovered first, his lawyer instincts kicking in. You'll need to amend the estate filings. Disclosure requirements were met. Everything was discovered after probate closed. Everything was reported to appropriate authorities. Everything was taxed correctly. Your lawyer can verify that with Sandra Brennan, who's already documented the entire chain of discovery and sale. What were the items? Tyler's voice was quieter now, stunned rather than angry. What was worth $8 million? Family legacy. That's all you need to know. Catherine turned back toward the workshop, where students were probably listening through open windows, absorbing this confrontation as its own kind of education. I have a class to teach. Don't come back unless you're ready to apologize for every dismissive comment, every prediction of failure, and every insinuation that Dad was wrong to trust me. She walked away before they could respond, her hands shaking with adrenaline, but her spine straight with certainty. Behind her, she heard their car doors slam, engine start, gravel spray as they left with the kind of dramatic exit that proved they'd understood nothing. Inside the workshop, 12 teenagers pretended to be absorbed in their projects while obviously having heard everything. Catherine picked up her chisel, steadying her breathing before addressing the elephant in the room. Lesson for today. People will doubt you based on their assumptions rather than your capabilities. They'll tell you what you can't do based on their limitations, not your potential. Your job is to prove them wrong not through arguing, but through building something that matters. She demonstrated the next cut, her hands steady despite the emotional storm. My father taught me that. Now I'm teaching you. What you do with it is your choice. A girl named Maria, 16, with careful hands and quiet intensity, raised her hand. Miss Catherine, that thing you said about $8 million, was that real? Yes. And your brothers didn't know? No. They assumed I was poor and desperate because I chose caregiving over career. They measured success in money and couldn't imagine I might have both wealth and purpose. That's incredibly satisfying. Maria's grin was fierce. Like really satisfying. They must feel so stupid. The point isn't making them feel stupid. The point is that their opinion of me never mattered. The only opinions that matter are from people who understand what you're building and why. Catherine looked around at faces showing various degrees of comprehension and inspiration. You're all here because you want to learn craftsmanship. Some people will think that a waste of time compared to pursuing conventional success. Those people are wrong. But you'll only know that if you trust your own judgment more than their limitations. The lesson continued with new energy, students working with increased focus, the confrontation having somehow validated rather than disrupted the workshop's purpose. After class, Tommy pulled Catherine aside, his expression thoughtful. That took guts, confronting them in front of students. I probably should have handled it privately. No, those kids needed to see that standing up to bullies matters at any age. That protecting what you value is worth the conflict. He paused. My father told me to take the safe path, get a steady job with benefits, forget carpentry dreams. Seeing you fight for this today, that's the example they needed. The fall semester brought expansion. The waiting list had grown to 40 students, demand exceeding capacity despite Catherine adding Wednesday evening classes. Amira proposed hiring additional instructors, creating a formal curriculum, and pursuing grants that could fund scholarships for kids whose families couldn't afford materials. We're becoming something bigger than Saturday hobby classes. This could be a legitimate vocational training program, certified for high school credit, recognized by trade unions as preparatory education. Catherine reviewed the proposals with Patricia's help, the financial advisor ensuring expansion wouldn't outpace resources. The coins provided ample capital, but sustainable programs needed diversified funding, grants, donations, student fees structured on sliding scales, partnership revenues from organizations that value the mission. They incorporated as a full nonprofit by October, the Miguel Martinez Community Workshop gaining 501c3 status and a legal structure necessary for serious growth. Catherine became executive director officially, drawing a $40,000 salary that was modest by nonprofit standards but sufficient for her needs. The house in Riverside became her permanent home, the renovation complete and the space transformed into something that honored everyone who'd contributed to its existence. She'd installed photographs throughout, Antonio at his original workbench, Rosa in the garden she'd tended for 50 years, Dad teaching students at the community center, Catherine and her brothers as children before fracture became permanent. Marcus and Tyler appeared in some photos, their younger selves smiling and unguarded, The boys they'd been before ambition and calculation replaced simpler joys. Catherine kept those images because forgetting who they'd been felt like betraying who they might have become if different choices had been made. They didn't call after the workshop confrontation, didn't send letters through lawyers, didn't appear at the house or attempt contact. The silence felt like both relief and loss. The complicated grief of relationships that should have been better but couldn't overcome the weight of accumulated resentment. Dorothy mentioned seeing Marcus at a charity event in November. His response to questions about Catherine brief and carefully neutral. He said you were doing well, pursuing your interests, like you'd taken up pottery instead of building a legitimate organization. He'll never understand. Neither will Tyler. No, but their understanding was never the point. Dorothy looked at the workshop through the window, students visible working on projects. You've built something your father will be proud of, something your grandmother protected for decades, something that matters beyond family dysfunction and money they'll never need. The first-year anniversary of Dad's death arrived in December with snow covering Riverside in white that softened edges and muted sound. Catherine spent the day in the workshop alone, working on a dresser commission that had come through word of mouth, a young couple wanting a piece built with the same care Antonio and Miguel had brought to their craft. She worked slowly, methodically, choosing wood for grain and stability, cutting joints with precision that honored technique passed down through generations. Her hands moved with confidence born from practice and teaching, the skills Dad had given her refined through months of daily use. The dresser would take weeks to complete, would sell for $8,000, fair compensation for materials and labor and expertise, would sit in someone's bedroom for generations if maintained properly, a functional, beautiful object that transcended its utilitarian purpose. This was wealth measured in meaning, legacy built through craft, success defined by purpose rather than profit. Catherine worked until darkness fell, the workshop's lights creating warm islands in winter cold. She cleaned her tools carefully, maintained the workspace with the discipline Dad had instilled, and locked up with the satisfaction of a day spent building something that mattered. Inside the house, she made tea and sat in the living room Dad had helped design but never seen completed. The space was warm and beautiful, filled with furniture she'd made or restored, books she'd collected, photographs documenting lives connected across generations. The hidden panel on the workbench still held over 4,000 gold coins, while she'd barely touched beyond initial renovation and workshop establishment. Patricia had invested a portion conservatively, creating income streams that would sustain operations indefinitely. The rest remained secure, available if needed, but not driving decisions made from desperation rather than intention. Catherine pulled out the letters from Dad, from Abuela Rosa, from the estate lawyers documenting Antonio's commission in 1968. She read them again, looking for nuances she might have missed, finding comfort in the careful words that had guided her transformation. Her phone buzzed. Not Marcus or Tyler, whose numbers remained blocked, but an unknown number with a Chicago area code. She almost didn't answer. Then curiosity won. Catherine Martinez? Speaking. This is Father Donnelly from St. Augustine's. I'm sorry to call so late, but I have something that belonged to your father. He asked me to hold it for a year after his death, then deliver it to you personally. Would you be available tomorrow? Catherine's heart rate accelerated. What is it? A letter in a small package. He was very specific about the timing. They arranged to meet the following afternoon at the church. Catherine spent the evening wondering what Dad had prepared, what final message he'd left for her to find after a year of transformation. Father Donnelly met her in his office, a cluttered, comfortable space that smelled like old books and furniture polish. He pulled a sealed envelope from his desk drawer, cream-colored and heavy, Catherine's name written in Dad's careful handwriting. He gave this to me 6 months before he died. Made me promise to wait exactly 1 year before delivering it. Said you'd need that time to understand what he'd left you. Catherine took the envelope with shaking hands, breaking the seal Dad had placed over a year ago when he'd still been alive, still fighting, still preparing for what came after. Mihija, if you're reading this, you've survived the first year. You found the coins, used them wisely, and built something I couldn't finish myself. I'm proud of you. Catherine, prouder than I could ever express while alive. I knew Marcus and Tyler would fight you. Knew they'd measure everything in money and call your choices wasteful. Knew they'd try to convince you to sell and invest and pursue the kind of success they understand. I'm sorry for putting you in that position, but I trusted you more than I trusted them with what really matters. The coins represent Antonio's skill and Rose's patience, and my faith that you'd honor all of it. But there's one more thing, something I couldn't tell you before, because the weight would have been too heavy. In 1984, when I received the letter from the estate lawyers explaining about the coins, they included a second item, a journal Antonio had kept, documenting his work and thoughts and the life he'd built in America. He wrote about every major commission, every piece he created, every student he taught. But he also wrote about you, Catherine, about holding you when you were born, teaching you to touch wood and feel its grain, seeing in your small hands the same gift he'd had at that age. Antonio died when you were barely old enough to remember him, but he knew you'd inherited his talent. He wrote that you'd be the one to carry the craft forward, that your hands would build beauty long after his were still. I've kept that journal safe for 40 years, waiting for the right time to give it to you. That time is now, after you've proven to yourself what Antonio already knew, that you're a craftsman in the truest sense, someone who understands that making things well is its own reward. The journal is in Father Donnelly's keeping. Read it slowly, learn from it, and understand that you come from a line of builders who valued meaning over money, craft over convenience, beauty over profit. Continue what we started, Mihija. Teach the next generation what Antonio taught me and I taught you. Build things that last. Care about the work more than the wealth. You've already succeeded beyond anything I hoped for. Everything else is just proving it to yourself. Contadu me amor. Papa Father Donnelly produced the journal, leather-bound and aged, Antonio's name embossed on the cover in gold that had faded but not disappeared. Catherine took it reverently, feeling the weight of decades and dedication and knowledge preserved across generations. Your father loved you very much. The priest's voice was gentle. Everything he planned was designed to help you become who you were meant to be. Catherine couldn't speak past the emotion clogging her throat. She nodded, clutching the journal and letter, and fled before tears could become sobs. She read Antonio's journal over the following week, absorbing his observations about wood and design and the philosophy of craftsmanship that transcended mere technique. His English was imperfect, but his meaning clear, each entry showing a mind that understood beauty could be built by patient hands and careful attention. The entries about Catherine made her cry. Descriptions of a toddler who gravitated toward his workshop, who touched tools with reverence despite not understanding their purpose, who watched him work with the kind of focus that predicted future dedication. Catherine will be a builder. I see it in how she studies my hands, how she wants to help even when she's too small to be useful. She has the gift, the understanding that materials can become something greater through care and skill. I won't live to teach her properly, but Miguel will. He has my hands and my heart. He'll pass it to her when the time comes. The prediction had been accurate. Antonio had seen in a toddler what would manifest decades later as adult capability and dedication. The journal also contained technical notes, drawings of joints and furniture designs, specifications for projects long since completed or forgotten. Catherine studied them with the attention of a student learning from a master, incorporating Antonio's techniques into her own work. She was teaching his methods now, passing along knowledge that had traveled from Mexico to Chicago, from Antonio to Miguel to Catherine to teenagers who'd carry it forward into their own futures. The legacy was alive, growing, becoming something none of them could have predicted, but all of them would have celebrated. Christmas arrived with the workshop closed for the holiday, students dispersed to families, the space quiet but filled with the evidence of work completed and skills developing. Catherine spent Christmas Eve alone by choice, cooking a simple dinner and reading Antonio's journal by the fireplace Dad had restored years ago. Her phone rang near midnight. Tyler's number unblocked somehow his. name appearing on the screen like a ghost from a past she tried to leave behind. She answered on impulse, curiosity overriding caution. Cat. His voice was rough, uncertain. I'm sorry. For all of it. For doubting you. For fighting you. For treating Dad's legacy like it was just assets to liquidate. Catherine said nothing, waiting. I saw the article in the Tribune. The one about the workshop expanding, about you getting certified as vocational training, about kids getting scholarships and union apprenticeships through your program. Marcus showed it to me, said we'd been wrong about you. You were. She kept her voice level despite anger stirring. You measured everything in money and couldn't imagine success looked different for different people. I know. I'm sorry. He paused, gathering courage. Can I visit? See what you've built? Maybe try to understand what Dad saw in you that we missed? Catherine thought about forgiveness and family, about bridges burned and relationships that might be salvageable with effort from both sides. She thought about Dad's letter, about Antonio's journal, about legacies that transcended individual grievances. Saturday, 10 a.m. Come alone, and come ready to actually listen instead of just waiting to argue. I will. Thank you, Kat. She hung up feeling uncertain and cautious, and maybe, possibly, hopeful that some fractures could heal if both sides stopped fighting long enough to see what had been broken. Tyler arrived exactly at 10, his car less ostentatious than usual, his clothes casual rather than business formal. He stood in the driveway looking at the house with visible surprise, taking in the restoration work and the beauty Catherine had created from neglect. This is incredible. I had no idea. That's because you never asked. You assumed I was playing at renovation instead of actually building something. Catherine unlocked the workshop, gesturing him inside. This is what $8 million looks like when it's invested in meaning instead of just profit. The workshop took his breath away. She saw it in his face, the recognition that this was professional-grade space designed with care and built with quality. He walked through slowly, touching workbenches, examining tools, reading the mission statement mounted on the wall. The Miguel Martinez Community Workshop exists to teach the next generation that their hands matter, that craftsmanship is its own reward, and that making things well is success worth pursuing. Dad would have loved this. Tyler's voice was rough with emotion. This is exactly what he tried to build at the community center, expanded and supported properly. It's what he deserved to have, but never had resources to create. So I created it for him, using wealth he protected for exactly this purpose. They sat in a small office area, Catherine making coffee while Tyler absorbed the reality of what she'd accomplished. She showed him Antonio's journal, explained about the coins and the decades of careful preservation, described how the inheritance had transformed her understanding of what family legacy could mean. Marcus won't come. Tyler's certainty was sad but absolute. He's too proud to admit he was this wrong. But I needed you to know that I see it now. I understand why Dad trusted you, why he gave you the workshop and the house and everything that mattered. Because I measured success in meaning instead of money. Yes. He looked at her directly. I'm sorry I couldn't see that before. Sorry I made it harder when you were already dealing with so much. Catherine thought about grudges and forgiveness, about the difference between apologies and actual change. Show me you mean it. Not through words, but through supporting what I'm building. Come to open houses. Bring your kids to see what their grandfather created. Maybe even take a class and learn something Dad tried to teach you decades ago. Tyler smiled, genuine warmth breaking through professional polish. I'd like that. I'd really like that. They spent the afternoon talking honestly for the first time in years. Tyler asked about the workshop's plans, offered business advice that was actually helpful rather than condescending, and listened when Catherine explained her vision for expanding vocational training throughout the region. He left with a promise to return, to bring his family, to support the mission rather than fight it. Catherine watched him drive away and felt something loosen in her chest. Not complete forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility that some relationships could heal if both sides chose growth over grievance. Marcus never called, never visited, never acknowledged that Catherine had succeeded beyond anything he'd predicted. The silence was its own kind of statement, pride and stubbornness combining to prevent the vulnerability apology required. Catherine let him go without chasing, focusing instead on the family she was building through teaching and craft and shared purpose. The students who'd been strangers were becoming community. The teaching was becoming livelihood. The workshop was becoming legacy. On the second anniversary of Dad's death, Catherine held a celebration instead of a memorial. 200 people filled the workshop and spilled into the yard. Students past and present, community center staff, former colleagues from Dad's union, neighbors who'd known Antonio and Rosa, volunteers who'd helped build the program. They shared food and stories and gratitude for Miguel Martinez, who'd built beauty and taught meaning and left behind a daughter who understood what really mattered. Tommy Rodriguez gave a speech about how Dad had changed his life. Amira talked about the workshop's impact on youth development. Patricia presented numbers showing how the program's financial sustainability ensured it would survive generations. And Catherine stood in the workshop surrounded by people who'd become family, looking at the workbench that held secrets and supported creation, and felt the weight of inheritance finally settle into something like peace. She'd kept the promises. She'd honored the legacy. She'd built something that would outlast all of them. Dad would have been proud. Abuela Rosa would have been proud. Antonio would have been proud. And Catherine was learning, slowly, to be proud of herself. The final item in Dad's letter had been a request. When you're ready, teach someone else what you've learned. Not just woodworking skills, but understanding that inheritance is responsibility, that money is a tool, and that meaning matters more than wealth. Find a young person struggling the way you struggled, and give them the same chance I gave you. That's how legacies survive, not through hoarding what we have, but through passing it forward. Catherine had been thinking about this request for months, looking at the students who filled her workshop, and wondering which one needed what she'd been given. The answer appeared in January. A 15-year-old named Sophia Chin, whose mother had died 6 months ago, whose father worked 3 jobs to keep their family housed, whose hands showed the same careful attention Catherine recognized from her own younger self. Sophia had been attending classes for 3 months, quiet and intense, absorbing knowledge like she'd been starving for it. She stayed after sessions to practice, arrived early to help set up, asked questions that showed she was thinking beyond the immediate project to broader applications. Catherine found her one Saturday after class, sitting alone at a workbench, hands moving over wood with the kind of reverence that predicted lifelong dedication. "Sophia, can we talk?" The girl looked up, wariness automatic. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, the opposite." Catherine sat across from her, choosing words carefully. "My father left me an inheritance, not just tools and property, but understanding that craftsmanship matters and meaning supersedes money. I've been looking for someone to pass that forward to, someone who'd value it the way I have." She pulled out a small wooden box she'd made specifically for this purpose, opening it to reveal a set of chisels that had belonged to Antonio. Japanese steel, perfectly maintained, the kind of tools professional craftsmen spent careers collecting. "These are my grandfather's. He brought them from Mexico in 1952, used them for 40 years, passed them to my father, who used them for another 40. They're worth maybe $3,000 to collectors, but they're priceless to someone who'll actually use them properly." Sophia's eyes were wide, her hands trembling as she reached toward the tools and then pulled back, uncertain whether touching was allowed. "I want you to have them, not as a loan, but as inheritance, with the understanding that you'll care for them, use them, and eventually pass them to someone else who will value what they represent." "I can't." Sophia's voice broke. "These are too valuable. What if I damage them? What if I'm not good enough?" "You will be. I see in you what Antonio saw in me, what Dad saw in every student he taught. Hands that can build and heart that understands why building matters." Catherine closed the box, pressing it into Sophia's hands. "Accept the gift. Honor the legacy. And when you're ready, teach someone else what you've learned. That's how meaning survives." Sophia cried, clutching the box to her chest like it contained her entire future. Maybe it did. Maybe that's what inheritance was supposed to be. Not just money or property, but possibility passed forward with faith that the receiver would understand its value. Catherine left her alone with the tools, walking outside where snow was beginning to fall. She stood in the yard of her grandmother's house, looking at the workshop where students learned and the home that had been preserved for exactly this purpose. $8 million in gold coins still hidden in the workbench Dad had built. $200,000 spent on creating this foundation. The rest invested carefully, generating income that ensured sustainability. But the real wealth wasn't in the coins. It was in the students who'd learned that their hands mattered, in the community that had supported rather than dismissed her choices, in the legacy that honored everyone who'd fought to preserve it. Catherine pulled out her phone, taking a photo of the workshop with warm light spilling from windows into winter darkness. She posted it to the nonprofit social media with a caption Dad would have approved. Year 2 complete. Hundreds of students taught. Thousands of hours of craftsmanship shared. Infinite meaning created from finite resources. Thank you to everyone who believed in this mission. Thank you to Miguel Martinez who started it all. This is what inheritance looks like when it's invested in what matters. The responses came immediately. Students sharing their projects, parents expressing gratitude, community members offering support. The digital proof that what she'd built was real and valued, and making difference that transcended any monetary calculation. Inside the house, Catherine made tea and sat in the living room with Antonio's journal, reading entries about craft and dedication and the particular satisfaction of building things that lasted. Outside, snow continued falling, covering Riverside in white that made everything clean and new. Tomorrow, she'd return to the workshop, would teach more students, would complete the dresser commission, would continue building the legacy Dad had trusted her to preserve. But tonight, in the quiet of the house 3 generations had protected, Catherine simply sat with the weight of inheritance and the lightness of purpose, understanding finally that she'd succeeded not despite her choices, but because of them. Marcus and Tyler had been wrong. Dad had been right. And Catherine had proven it the only way that mattered, by building something beautiful from what she'd been given. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.